Agreeableness is one of the 5 traits of the 5-factor personality model. What is agreeableness? What does it look like? Well, we're going to be talking all about that today on Real Talk. Let's go. Okay, welcome back to another episode of Real Talk with Kane Adams. We are at the beginning of our personality series. We're talking all about personalities. Last week we had our introductory episode where we talked about what is a personality, why is it important to learn and understand personalities. And so if you missed that episode, you want to check that one out. You want to watch that one before you watch this one. Because it'll make more sense. We also talked about the 5-factor personality model as well, which is a psychometric test that is revered a lot in the psychological community. It's a substantiated and robust test. I rate it very highly, and so that's kind of why I'm using it as a foundation for this series to talk about personality, because I think it describes personality really, really well. It's probably the best personality or psychometric test that you can take, in my opinion. If you want to take the test, which I highly recommend that you do before watching this series, you can take it at understandmyself.com, and I've placed the link in the description below so you can click on that link and take the test. It's a fairly easy test. It's about 10 to 15 minutes. I think it costs about $15 New Zealand or $10 American, and it'll ask you a series of questions, and then at the end it'll give you a report that's very detailed, that'll describe your personality, and you'll come to understand that. And it's important that you take that test before you watch this series, because like I mentioned last time, if you watch this series and learn all the information before taking the test, then confirmation bias can enter, where because you know the information, because you've learned about all of the 5 traits, when you are asked the questions, you can predict where they're kind of heading in terms of the results. And so it can skew your results. So you want to take the test before you watch this series. I should make a disclaimer as well that I'm not endorsed by any of this. I'm not sponsored. This is not an ad. I'm not making money from this. I simply just, I find this test one of the best psychometric tests that I've taken, and I rate it very highly, and I'm just passionate about it, and so I want you to get on it as well. Okay, so very quick recap. The 5-factor model is made up of 5 personality traits and 10 subtraits. So each of the 5 personalities has a set of 2 subtraits that attach to it. They are agreeableness, which is made up of compassion and politeness; conscientiousness, which is made up of industriousness and orderliness; extroversion, which is made up of enthusiasm and assertiveness; neuroticism, which is made up of withdrawal and volatility; and openness to experience, which is made up of intellect and openness, which is related to creativity. And these are terms which you're going to learn about and be very familiar with as you go through the course. So today we're going to talk about agreeableness, the very first one. We're going to answer 3 questions. Number 1, what is agreeableness? Number 2, what are the advantages and disadvantages of being high in agreeableness? And then number 3, what are the advantages and disadvantages of being low in agreeableness? And so I'll probably cover those 3 questions with each of the traits that we talk about, because it's good to talk about, obviously what the trait is, but then to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each of the traits, because no matter where you are, there'll always be advantages, there'll always be disadvantages. No trait is better than the other. I should add as well that a lot of this material that I'm teaching on is collated from the teachings of Dr. Jordan Peterson, and so I'm sure you're familiar with him. But if you want to learn more about agreeableness in more detail, then I've placed a link in the description as well to one of his teachings on agreeableness. He is the grand master when it comes to personality. Okay, so what is agreeableness? What do we mean by agreeableness? Agreeableness is the tendency to weigh up others' interests against your own. So I guess the best way to look at it is you can look at it in terms of negotiation. So if you're high in agreeableness, you're more likely to negotiate on somebody else's behalf against your own interests. Whereas if you're low in agreeableness, you're more likely to negotiate on your own behalf against the interests of others. And so basically, if you're high in agreeableness, you're going to place other people's interests over your own interests. And then if you're low in agreeableness, it'll be the opposite. Agreeableness, it's broken down into 2 subtraits, which are compassion and politeness. What are the difference? What's the difference between those two? So people who are compassionate tend to be people who are empathetic. They are people who are willing to listen to people who are interested in other people's problems, and needs and interests, and people who are there for people, people who are there for people. Whereas politeness tends to be more about respecting authority, following the rules, respecting the autonomy of other people, not being pushy, and basically, respecting people. And they both work hand in hand as well. So people who are high in compassion tend to be high in politeness as well. All right, common behaviors among people who are high in compassion. They feel others' emotions. They like to do things for others. They have a soft side. They sympathize with others' feelings. They take time for others. They inquire about others' well-being. And then some common behaviors among people who are high in politeness. They don't believe that they are better than other people. They avoid imposing their will on other people. They are rarely demanding. They are often conceding. They rarely put people under pressure. They respect authority, and they are often compliant to avoid conflict. And we're going to talk all about avoiding conflict in this episode. Okay, so what are the advantages and disadvantages of being high in agreeableness? So let's say you've taken the test. The results have come out. You're a highly agreeable person. Okay, what are the advantages of that? What does that look like? Well, if you're an agreeable person, what you're going to be doing, obviously, like we mentioned before, is you're going to be placing the interests of others before your own needs and before your own interests. And so what that means is that you're going to be a very liked person. You're going to be someone who's warm, someone who's welcoming, someone who's not judgmental, someone who's involved in the needs of others, who's warm and welcoming, like I said. And people like those kind of people, People want agreeable people around them. They want people who will listen to them. They want people who will meet their needs and who will talk to them when they're down and celebrate the good things in life and cry in the hard times as well. And agreeable people are willing to do that. And so you're going to be someone who's very liked. People who are high in agreeableness, they're great in a team environment. They become a valuable player because they thrive off cooperation. They're willing to work with other people in a positive way. They know their strengths and weaknesses and how they can complement with the strengths and weaknesses of others. And they're willing to give credit where credit is due. So they tend to be, I would say humble, but humble tends to be more of a character trait opposed to personality. But I suppose people who are agreeable might lean towards humility a little bit more, but they're willing to give credit to people, and so they're a very valuable player in a team. People who are agreeable are willing to sympathize with people and feel their pain. You could even say that people who are agreeable have the ability to absorb the pain that others are experiencing in order to relieve them from some of the hardships and some of the pain. Which is a good thing, but at the same time, you can see how that can go south very quickly if you're not careful. If you're high in agreeableness and you're absorbing too much pain from too many people, then you're going to be carrying a weight on your shoulders that you ought not to carry. The weight of the world will be on your shoulders, and you don't want that. For an agreeable person, to be liked becomes a primary motivator. So remember last week with our introductory episode, we talked about how personality can be seen as a frame of reference. And so people who are agreeable tend to view the world as an opportunity where they can be liked, where they can spread love, where they can spread compassion, where they can bring harmonious relationships around people, where they can experience joy and peace with other people, right? And to be liked. And so that becomes a primary motivator. It's quite interesting, actually, because I read this article the other day that apparently companies, and I suppose it's no surprise really, that companies are looking to hire agreeable people over people who are disagreeable. So, this article is kind of saying, gone are the days where the corporate industry is made up of people who are competitive, and big companies are looking to hire agreeable people and conscientious people who will work hard and will work alongside team players and be cooperative, right? Which is a massive advantage because it means that if you're an agreeable person, one, you're more likely to be hired by a company, and two, you're more likely to keep your job as well, because when it comes to letting people go, they're probably going to, well, let's put it this way, people who are disagreeable are going to be fired more than people who are agreeable, right? And that's a massive advantage. But I suppose when I read this article, it missed out probably, I'd say, a sinister motive from the companies as to why they hire agreeable people. And it didn't address this in the article. But I'd say a reason why companies hire people who are agreeable and conscientious is because if you're agreeable and conscientious, you're going to work hard, you're not going to complain about it, and you're going to do as you're told. And that's what companies want. They want people who will work hard and not complain about it. But the disadvantage of that is that means as an agreeable person, you are prone to being taken advantage of in these companies. And you're prone to burnout. You're prone to being given more work than you ought to be given because you're too afraid to say no. You're too afraid to stand up against the company. So you can see the advantages and the disadvantages of that. And that's probably a good segue, actually, to talk about disadvantages. What are some of the disadvantages of being high in agreeableness? Because you'd think maybe, when you look at like the words compassion and politeness, you'd think, who would not want to be that, Who would not want to be an agreeable person? It seems to be far more favorable to be an agreeable person than it would be to be a disagreeable person. But being an agreeable person definitely comes with its disadvantages. So an agreeable person would be someone who's absolutely prone to people pleasing. So if you're an agreeable person, you're going to be a people pleaser. You're going to be someone who is more prone to being needy, especially if you're high in extroversion and neuroticism. Because if you're high in neuroticism, you're sensitive to negative emotion. You're going to want to find comfort and safety. If you're extroverted, you're going to want to find that comfort and safety in a social environment. And then if you're agreeable, you want to be liked as well, which is just the perfect concoction to being a very needy person. In fact, on the subject of people pleasing, I had a message the other day. Someone messaged me this. I wrote it down because I thought, man, this is such a perfect example of someone who's agreeable. And I'm sure this person wouldn't mind me saying this, but the message that I read, it opened with this. It says, "Hey, I was wondering," in brackets, "if you had time," close bracket, "at any point over the next month or so, whether you would be able to help me with," then insert request here. And I read that out and I thought, man, isn't that just a perfect example of agreeableness, placing as many disclaimers as possible before presenting the request as to ensure that the request would not upset the apple cart in any way. And it's typical of someone who's agreeable. They don't want to upset the apple cart, They want to do whatever they can to ensure that the other person is at peace and that the other person is at ease and at rest. They don't want to upset anyone. Another disadvantage. So agreeable people put large focus on the maintenance of intimate, positive relationships, which is not a bad thing. That's a great thing. But that also makes them conflict avoidant. And they avoid conflict. They're too afraid to put forward their own interests in fear of coming across too pushy or too demanding. And because of this, they become resentful and they can engage in passive-aggressive behavior. So basically, people who are high in agreeableness, they don't want to say what they want. They don't want to come across as pushy or demanding, and so what they want, they keep it inside them. And what happens is then resentment can grow. And I say passive-aggressive behavior because you find that people who tend to be passive-aggressive are people who are agreeable because they're so frustrated inside and they're so afraid of sharing that frustration in case of not being liked that they just end up trying to be positive, but that frustration comes out. It seeps out of that positivity, which turns into passive-aggressive behavior. And it's not nice, and people can spot that a mile away. Agreeable people need to engage in conflict because it's only through conflict that resolution can occur. And I think this is probably especially true with people who are in close relationships like a marriage, is that there are conflicts that you have to engage in, otherwise they're not going to go away. There's no choice. And sometimes the best thing to do is to hash it out with someone in a high-intensity manner in order to resolve the conflict as quickly and as effectively and as efficiently as possible, right? So that you're not carrying this on for 30 years in your marriage or whatever it is. And agreeable people don't like to do that. They're not willing to do it because to engage in conflict means to experience the negative emotion that comes with it. And because an agreeable person, their primary motivator is to be liked, when you're engaging in a conflict, you're not going to be liked that much in that conflict, are you? you're not going to be liked very much. And people who are agreeable don't like that. And so it's to their detriment that that happens as well. One thing to note about agreeable people is that just because they're avoiding conflict, that doesn't mean that they're not angry or they're not frustrated. It just means that they're very good at hiding it. And so, and what happens is that when you have an agreeable person, or anyone for that matter, hide the frustration, when you hide that frustration and hide that anger and avoid that conflict, then resentment can occur. And Jordan Peterson talks about resentment really well, actually. He says how there are two reasons why we experience resentment. And the first reason is either one, we just need to grow the hell up and stop whining and stop complaining. And we actually just need to get over ourselves and get over it and stop being such a whiny baby or whatever. Or the second reason why we experience resentment is because somebody is taking advantage of you in a way that is not favorable to you, and you're too afraid to say no. You're too afraid to set up the boundaries, and you actually there's a conflict there that you need to engage in, and you're too afraid to do it, and so it causes resentment. And so it's up to you to work out which one of those two reasons you're feeling resentful, right? What's interesting is that if you ask a disagreeable person what they want, they'll be able to tell you straight away. They'll say, this is what I want and this is how I'm going to get it. But you ask an agreeable person what they want, and they can struggle to articulate or share with you what they want. And why is that? It's because an agreeable person can become so accustomed to living in accordance to other people's needs and other people's interests and serving other people's visions that they don't even have a vision for their own life. That they tailor their lives in accordance to the vision of others, which is not a good thing to do. And so, they can't even tell you what they want, let alone how they're going to get it, because they don't even know what they want. And so that's something to be aware of as an agreeable person, to watch out for that. That there comes times where you actually need to learn to stand up for yourself and to ask yourself the question, what do I actually want and how can I get it? Okay, so another thing is that, people who are high in agreeableness, and this is a bigger disadvantage, is that they tend to be very indecisive. And that kind of follows off with what I was saying before. When it comes to making a decision about their own lives, they're so used to looking to what other people are doing and looking to how they can help other people that they become very indecisive when it comes to making decisions for themselves. And that can be very frustrating for people, particularly in a marriage or in a close relationship. When someone is unbelievably indecisive, it can be very, very frustrating for people. And then lastly, this is probably the most important disadvantage, is that agreeable people are prone to being taken advantage of. And a disagreeable person can sniff out someone who's agreeable in an instant. Because if you're someone who's going to be constantly putting somebody else's needs before your own, people who are disagreeable are going to see that, and they are absolutely going to take advantage of that. And so you get taken advantage of, whether it's by companies or by other people, by friends, by coworkers, by family. That can happen often in family. And even, like how I mentioned that article before about the companies, how they're looking to hire people who are agreeable. I guarantee these big companies, the people who are at the top, the CEO, the directors, the executives, these people, they're not going to be agreeable people. They will be disagreeable people. And so you could say it's almost hypocritical to say it, but it's how it's operated. That you got the disagreeable people at the top. They're going to want to find agreeable people so they can control them, so they can take advantage of them. And so that's probably the biggest disadvantage of being high in agreeableness, is that you're naturally prone to being taken advantage of. You need to learn to say no. People who are agreeable need to learn to stand up for themselves and say no. They need to intentionally focus on developing boundaries, whereas boundaries come quite naturally to disagreeable people. And that's true. So people who are agreeable, boundaries don't come naturally to them. People who are disagreeable, boundaries come very naturally. And so you need to stand up and learn to say no. You need to learn to be assertive and to practice that as well. And that can be, sometimes it can be helpful for people who are agreeable, who are not naturally assertive, to be able to practice that with someone that they trust. You can almost enter like a role play where you practice a scenario where you need to say no to someone, and you literally say it out loud and you practice the words, and you might need to do that to be able to learn to be assertive. Okay, so those are some disadvantages when it comes to being high in agreeableness. And I'll add one more actually as well. remember how before we talked about being a compassionate person sounds like a pretty good thing. Who wouldn't want to be a compassionate person? Is it possible to have too much compassion for someone? Absolutely. It's definitely possible, because what happens is an excess of compassion can stifle growth in people, in the people that you're helping. Excessively compassionate people are likely to do too much for people to a point where it becomes a detriment to the people that they're helping. And I just think about this mantra actually in retirement homes. They say that you should not do something for the patient that they can do themselves. Because when you do something for someone that they can do themselves, you end up undermining their autonomy, and you actually you deprive them of the opportunity of doing something for themselves and growing in that area of their lives. Classic example of this would be raising children, and you see these parents who are loving and compassionate to their children, but way excessively to a point where it's not helping them at all. They're doing everything for their kids, and their kids don't have the opportunity at all to do anything for themselves. Another classic example is raising teenagers. You have these teenagers who are making foolish decisions one after the other, and every single time the parent bails them out and rescues them, out of in a state of compassion. But by doing that, you're not helping your child at all, because they're not given the opportunity to learn and to make decisions on their own and to face the consequences that they ought to be facing from the mistakes that they've made, which will give them the opportunity to grow in life, right? And so you end up, too much compassion, you end up making things worse for the person that you're being compassionate towards. In fact, here's a one-liner you can write down. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to withhold your own compassion, because it gives somebody the opportunity to grow and to be the best person that they can be and to make the decisions that they need to make, right? So that's the advantages and disadvantages of high agreeableness. What about low agreeableness? What about being low in agreeableness? Here are some common behaviors among people who are low in compassion. They disregard the feelings of others. They often do things for themselves. They can come across blunt and harsh. They can struggle to understand the feelings of others, and they can lack empathy. Common behaviors among people who are low in politeness: they focus on their own needs first. They take advantage of others to serve their own interests. They are often demanding and rarely conceding. They are often stubborn. They struggle to respect authority, and they often engage in conflict with ease. Now, when you read those behaviors, you think, who would want to be a disagreeable person, right? I mean, it sounds horrible. It sounds like, gosh, if you're taking the test and you rank low in agreeableness, you think that you're an awful person, but you're not. We'll go through them, but there are massive advantages to being a disagreeable person. The first advantage being is that if you're a disagreeable person, you get what you want. You know what you want and you know how to get it. And when it comes to moving forward in life, particularly in career, is that you know what you want. You know how to get it. And that's a huge advantage. That's a massive advantage. Agreeableness is one of the biggest predictors of salary in a negative sense. So what I mean by that is that if you're an agreeable person, you're less likely to put forward your own interests. Therefore, you're less likely to negotiate a pay rise, and you're more likely to be on lower pay than your less agreeable counterparts. In other words, if you're disagreeable, you make more money. And that's proven by scientific data. It's just true. It's people who are disagreeable are on average on a higher salary than those who are agreeable, because they're not afraid to negotiate it. They know their worth. People who are disagreeable, they know their worth. They know what they want. They know how to get it. And that's a huge advantage. This is why disagreeable people will thrive in jobs like sales and real estate and in law, because they thrive on the competition. They thrive on being dominant. They thrive on winning, and they're competitive by nature. And so you'll probably find, you'll know people who are very competitive by nature. It's kind of the opposite of cooperation, whether it's in sports, whether it's in sales or in job or work or whatever it is. And so people who are competitive tend to be people who are disagreeable. They get what they want. Just as with agreeable people, a primary motivator is to be liked, with disagreeable people, a primary motivator is to serve their own interests and to win. And that can have amazing, fantastic results for them through life, right? Disagreeable people don't often experience resentment because they don't do what they don't want to do. Okay, this is big. People who are disagreeable are not passive aggressive because they know. You know where you stand with disagreeable people, because if they don't want to do something, they won't do it. They'll tell you. If they don't like something, they'll tell you they don't like it. And so even though it can be intimidating, at least you know where you stand with disagreeable people, right? They know how to say no. They know how to put up boundaries. It comes easier for them. They have a very healthy autonomy and control over their lives, which is a huge advantage for people who are disagreeable. Disagreeable people can be viewed as stubborn, but that's because they know what they want. They're decisive. Like I mentioned before, they know what they want, and so they can make a decision. They're decisive people. And when it comes to leadership, boy, that is a trait that you want as a leader, and that you need as a leader, because people don't follow an indecisive leader. People want a leader who is decisive, who will make the hard calls when they need to be made. Obviously, I should make a disclaimer here that when it comes to leadership, there are certain personality traits that we will talk about that kind of tilt towards people being natural leaders. But there are advantages and disadvantages of each trait when it comes to leadership. For example, if you are low in agreeableness, you're going to be a decisive leader, which is a great thing. But if you're too disagreeable, then you can come across as authoritarian, and people don't want to follow a tyrant. And then likewise, if you're high in agreeableness, you're willing to listen to people. You're willing to be empathetic, which is a great trait for a leader because people want to be listened to. But of course, if you're too agreeable, then you're going to be indecisive, and you're not going to be willing to make the hard calls in fear of losing your likability, which is a poor trait when it comes to leadership. Okay, so those are the advantages of being low in agreeableness. What about the disadvantages? There are a few. People tend to probably not like you very much because if you're low in compassion and low in politeness, you're not necessarily a warm and welcoming person. People can often be intimidated by you if you're low in agreeableness because you're quite harsh and blunt and you say what you're thinking. And so you're more likely to say things that could be quite hurtful to people and people can take personally. And so people can be quite intimidated by you if you're low in agreeableness. Excessive disagreeableness can translate into violent and criminal behavior. In fact, disagreeableness would definitely be the biggest predictor of incarceration from a personality perspective. So you go into a prison and say, hypothetically, if every single person in the prison was to do the 5-factor test, you will find that the vast, vast majority of them will come out with very low agreeableness. And because basically the essence of criminal behavior is putting your own interests before the needs of others. That's kind of what that's what criminal behavior is. It's like, what crime is there where you're putting someone else's needs before your own, you know? I'm sure there might be a couple, but not many. And so, yeah, biggest predictor of incarceration. And something else to note as well, which is quite interesting, is that men on average are less agreeable than women. And this is why when you go into prisons, you'll see that the vast majority of people in prison are men over women. And I think a reason for that is because biologically women need to be more agreeable in order to in order to provide the compassion and the empathy that is necessary for infant care. So women need to look after their children. They need to look after their babies, and so they're naturally going to be more agreeable than disagreeable, I think, in that regard. Anyway, so low conscientiousness also plays a big role in predicting criminal behavior as well. And Jordan Peterson talks about this, because low agreeableness means that everything is for me and I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. But low conscientiousness would be someone else can do all the work and I'll reap all the benefits. So you put those two together, and that's a dangerous concoction for criminal behavior. And people who are extremely low in these traits can become psychopathic. If you add intelligence and high extroversion to the mix, then you get someone who's really dangerous, because not only are they not willing to do what you tell them to do, and not only are they willing to make other people do all the work and reap all the benefits, but they're going to be charming as well. And these are the kind of people who we would deem as narcissists. And narcissism, I mean, I won't go into it, but narcissism is another word that could be overused, and you have someone who could be slightly selfish, and you say, you're a narcissist. That's not what a narcissist is. Narcissism is about manipulation. It's about being able to have the charm where people like you, right? Because you're extroverted, and you're sociable. You're able to work the crowd, but you also know what you want. You know how to get it. And you're going to make other people do all the work and reap all the benefits. And that's narcissism just in a nutshell. A classic example of this would be Mark Twain's Tom Sawyer. He gets caught skipping school one day, and so they punish him by forcing him to whitewash this wall. So he starts whitewashing this wall, and what he does is he convinces the neighborhood friends to trade with him trinkets and treasures in order to, and then in return they receive the privilege of whitewashing this wall. And so he uses his charm to be able to make them do all the work, and he reaps the benefits, and he does what he wants to do. And so that's disagreeableness in a nutshell as well. And then lastly, one of the biggest disadvantages of being low in agreeableness is that disagreeable people can exercise predatory behavior. And like I said before, a disagreeable person can sniff out an agreeable person in an instant. So if you're extremely disagreeable, then you have danger of experiencing exercising predatory behavior. People disagreeable people have a special knack to be able to exploit any given situation to benefit their own interests, and they will absolutely use people if they can to meet their own needs and to serve their own interests. And it can be very difficult for an agreeable person to get alongside a disagreeable person out of fear, and this is where you have people entering the slave-tyrant relationship. A lot of abusive relationships. People get stuck in abusive relationships. You find 9 times out of 10, people who are stuck in an abusive relationship for a long period of time, one of the parties is disagreeable and the other party is agreeable. And they come together, and the agreeable person can't say no, and the disagreeable person will take advantage of will abuse and manipulate the hell out of the other person, and it becomes a tyrant-slave situation. And so that's what can happen as well. Anyway, but I prattle on. So that's agreeableness in a nutshell, basically. And like I said, with disagreeableness, it's not, because I suppose you could say the advantages are huge, and then the disadvantages are huge as well. And I suppose that's just something to be aware of if you're a disagreeable person. You're not a bad person. It's just if you allow your disagreeableness to take over you, and then you are prone to entering, criminal behavior or whatever. What a statement. Look, I'm just going to end it there. Okay, thank you so much for watching this episode. Next week, we're going to be talking about conscientiousness, which is all about responsibility and hard work and things like that. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on A Real Talk.